Science shows us that the sound of running water is the most preferred natural sound that's ever been tested. It calms us, it heals us, it lowers our heart rate, lowers our respiration rate.
You look at water, you sit by water, you hear water, and you have this feeling of being human and in the natural world.
We're genetically hardwired to seek these kinds of places next to rivers. Every small channel in this watershed is important to us. The fact that we have clean water in the city of Fort Collins is a result of this watershed.
The Poudre watershed is a really unique gem in Colorado. There's just a lot of people trying to work towards similar goals of creating resilient forests and resilient watersheds.
Poudre River technically starts in Rocky Mountain National Park at Poudre Lake, which is just a literal stone's throw away from the Continental Divide.
Up in the mountains we have national forest land, we have part of the national park, and then quite a bit of private land down in this middle section. And so there's really a mixture of land cover types and land ownership.
And this then flows into the main stem, is joined by the North Fork, and then that all flows together, hits the canyon mouth, and then flows through the city of Fort Collins, through the city of Windsor and Greeley, and into the South Platte. The Poudre River is a snow-dominated system. Water content is something that varies with the nature of the snow. Early season fresh snow is not as light and fluffy because there tends to be liquid water. It's more dense. 10 inches of snow, and that may be 2 inches of water. Mid-season, January, we can have 10 inches of snow, and that can be ½ an inch or even a ¼ inch of water. If you are a skier, you want that ¼ inch of water in 10 inches of snow. You know, we want to get our fresh powder turns in. At peak accumulation, we have a density that is between 30 and 40%. So if we then say we have 3 feet of snow, that then becomes 1 or more feet of water. That's a lot of water that's melting, and so that's why it adds a big slug of water to the system, and we get our big annual flows from snowmelt.
Scientists at Colorado State University have made a careful, extensive, and consistent study of the Poudre watershed for over a century to help inform the management of this river.
We have started to ask questions about where water has been coming into the river. There are intermediate elevations that don't accumulate as much snow that are also supplying river water. So we started trying to figure out, okay, how much water is coming into the river from different parts of the watershed. We'd have a map, it would have a stream on it, we'd arrive at that location and the stream wouldn't be there. That ended up being a really basic question. For all of these tributaries that are coming into the main river, which ones are actually contributing the flow? And so that's why we started Stream Tracker. Stream Tracker is a project where we're trying to engage people in monitoring streams when and where they flow.
We have turned to the power of the community, people out in their watershed that they love, hiking, biking, working, and just taking the time to mark where the stream is and whether or not they see flow. We've also been working with middle school students who have taken it upon themselves to adopt Stream Trackers and going out, visiting these streams, marking when they see flow, but then visiting these streams over time so they start to see that peak flow period where there's lots of water in the channel all the way through till the end of the season where they might capture the drying. They're all a very important piece to understanding how much water the Poudre is producing and when that water is being contributed to the larger stream channel, and really establishing a knowledge base of where our water is coming from based off of these simple, is there water, is there not water, and you use your mobile phone to mark the GPS and take a photo and upload it to that online database. This growing data set is now becoming a really valuable resource.
All of these tributary streams that we monitor have their own character, which is just totally fascinating to me.
CSU's research in rivers and their watersheds help enhance our understanding of how to maintain water quality through stream restoration.
Here we're in Little Beaver Creek, which is a tributary of the South Fork Poudre, which of course is tributary to the main stem Poudre. There's a really nice variety in this fairly small watershed. There's old growth forest in this part of the South Fork Poudre watershed, and that's very rare in the montane zone in Colorado because of the historic deforestation. Some of the stands of trees are greater than 200 years in age. If a tree is older, it's bigger. It's got a larger diameter and it's taller. So when it eventually dies, if it falls into the stream, it's more likely to stay where it fell. And it's an obstacle to other things going downstream, particularly during the snowmelt peak flows. And you have a pressure gradient as a function of that obstruction. So some of the water in the channel is forced into the stream bed. It'll flow just a short distance underground, and then it comes back into the stream downstream. The hypereik zone, that shallow zone beneath the surface flow, is sometimes called the river's liver because of its effect on water chemistry. Just the physical process of flowing through the subsurface keeps the water temperature cooler, but the chemical reactions that occur that affect water quality are largely a function of the microbes that live in the subsurface, and they can remove nitrate, they can increase the dissolved oxygen, they can either remove or add dissolved organic carbon, but they tend to improve water quality. So in many stream restoration projects, people are specifically focused on trying to increase hypereik exchange flows between the surface and the subsurface. If you have obstructions like log jams or single pieces of wood or even large boulders, those all increase hypereik exchange. So what we're trying to study here on Little Beaver Creek is how increasing the number of log jams affects the magnitude of that hypereik exchange. And we want to know that just because we're curious. But there will be a very applied aspect for restoration projects or management that seeks to improve hypereik exchange and water quality.
So natural disturbances like floods, fires, the landslides that fires create, all are important in keeping the kind of habitat that we have. What we're seeing now is a change in climate, and also we make changes as humans to the watershed. So our problem now is trying to figure out whether those changes are causing these disturbances to cross thresholds. Are the floods too strong? Are the fires too hot and create more sediment than might be natural?
Immediately after the wildfire, you have a huge export of inorganic mineral sediment that is flushed out. And following that, you also have an organic matter flush of that ash, all that burned material that's flooding into the stream. And that's usually pretty severe, and that's a big drinking water problem that municipalities have to deal with. But on the long term, you have continual effects. And this is something that isn't super well studied at this point. Even 10 and 15 years after a severe wildfire, we have continued elevated nutrients and elevated mineral content in our stream water. That nitrogen deteriorates stream quality.
We're up in Cache la Poudre watershed, but we're actually up in the headwaters of the watershed. Our main focus here is to kind of understand post-fire water quality recovery and more on the long-term scales. So we're picking fires that are 5 to 15 years after fire. Right here, we're looking at the High Park fire and the effects of that. So this is a pretty dramatic post-fire landscape. There's a lot of toothpicks where there used to be really big trees that are just totally charred trunks. And then you actually see some regeneration of young pine and some young aspen up there, nice and golden. And so this fire was actually in the summer of 2012. It was an incredibly severe fire. These really severe fires are pretty harsh for the landscapes. These are adapted to recover and are very in tune with low severity fire. And so that low severity fire is really important for these systems. And so that's kind of where this concept of prescribed burning has come in. So the goal of that is to kind of remove that understory layer, so grasses, shrubs, and then to remove some of the lowest branches of trees. And so that's called ladder fuel. So that's how a fire would move from a ground fire up into the trees into a crown fire. Another purpose of prescribed burning is to create a more patchy landscape where you have some clumps of really nice adult trees, and then you have a clump nearby where there's room open for regeneration and growth. And so those patchy landscapes are really healthy for our ecosystem. So in a way, you can use low severity fire to prevent massive fires like this from happening. After One of these severe wildfires, there's a significant released nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon. Our goal is to go in and ask the questions of why. Where is that nitrogen coming from? When is it being released? And why isn't it being processed in these systems? Nitrogen is actually a really interesting element. It's necessary for all life. Any nitrogen on a landscape will be grabbed by living matter for assimilation, for energy. So it's usually a limiting nutrient, meaning that there's not enough on a landscape to meet the demands of everything living on that landscape. In these systems, we're seeing a lot of excess nitrogen, which is the complete opposite of what we're used to seeing. And that excess is being transported to the stream networks. And what we're actually seeing is that those prescribed burn sites don't have very high levels of nitrogen like we're seeing in these wildfire sites.
CSU has a long tradition of research in forest science that is used to inform sound forest management. And of course, the health of our watersheds and the quality of our water is inseparable from the health of our forests. The Colorado Forest Restoration Institute is one of the groups at CSU that's helping foster sound forest management.
Our mission is really to bring science to forest management in our frequent fire forests in the western U.S. We spend a lot of time measuring trees and plants and the fuel loading out in the forests and measuring how the forest changes with forest management. We also, importantly, include economic and social analysis of community perceptions of risk and wildfire hazard, as well as the economics behind how to actually get this work done.
We're fortunate to live in a community where businesses and utilities can invest in forest restoration through the Peaks to People Water Fund.
So Peaks to People Water Fund was formed by the Nature Conservancy as well as the Center for Collaborative Conservation at CSU to proactively address the growing risk of severe wildfire that threatens our water resources. We've suppressed wildfire for so many decades, and as a result, when wildfire does occur, it's much more severe and there are greater impacts to water quality. And our aim is to get water-dependent businesses and our utilities to fund the work.
The water utilities have a lot of customers that they provide clean, fresh drinking water to. They provide it to city and residents, commercial businesses, and importantly, breweries. The breweries are a huge part of the solution in Fort Collins. They've made the connection and realized that their clean water that they make their beer from starts in the forest. After the Hyde Park fire, there was a lot of ash and sediment in the water, and it actually made the beer taste a little bit smoky. So they have realized that proactive approaches of forest management can help prevent disasters like that in the future.
We believe that businesses care about this work and will fund it, both from a business perspective, but they also care about the community they live in. Our tools actually allow us to calculate return on investment related to water quality. And then we can also calculate what we call co-benefits, such as improved habitat, avoided recreation loss, and avoided structure loss. Peaks to People has completed 2 projects to date. Those 2 completed projects comprise almost 200 acres. We've changed wildfire behavior on the vast majority of those acres so that instead of an active crown fire, it would be more of a surface fire or a passive fire. We estimate cost savings of over $100,000 in avoided home loss. In addition, about 1,000 metric tons of sediment avoided in our water supplies.
We have some of the best water that you can imagine in Fort Collins because we have this wild and scenic river.
In 1968, President Johnson signed the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, which set aside the most special rivers in our country for future generations.
It was closely associated with the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act and the Endangered Species Act. And they all arose out of the recognition that the environmental conditions in much of the continental U.S. had gotten so bad that it was a national travesty, and people were outraged. The Wild and Scenic Rivers Act developed as part of the recognition that ecosystems matter, not just water as a supply.
We had seen a lot of dam development. It was recognized that that amount of development and use of water needed to be balanced with some protection. The Wild and Scenic Rivers system consists of less than half of 1% of all of the rivers in the U.S. Cache the Poudre River was set aside for its recreational and scenic values, its cultural values, its fish and wildlife, and water quality.
One of the things that a lot of people don't know is that the Poudre River is the only wild and scenic river in Colorado. There are 208 across the country, so that puts it in rare company.
Throughout the higher elevation areas of Colorado, 60 to 90% of the annual precipitation falls as snow. Meltwater comes directly from the snowpack. That snow is usually quite clean.
We have such great water in the Cache la Poudre because we're so close to source.
It's pretty much distilled water as it comes out of these mountain channels.
And it's largely because of where it comes from and both what is there and what is not there. What is there is healthy forests, streams that have things like beaver dams and log jams. What is not there are 19th century mining sites and very much in the way of human population. So the fact that there's very little urbanization or suburbanization upstream from Fort Collins really helps.
This watershed is resilient. We can keep that water clean as it approaches the city, then we'll be able to have the kind of water that we really love to drink, like to take showers in, like to grow crops with, and probably important to many people, like to brew beer with.
In Fort Collins, where the Poudre River is coming down from the mountains, basically untouched. So we're getting a first pass at very clean, very fresh, and very soft water. Soft water in this case, meaning it doesn't have a lot of minerals, not a lot of impurities. So a brewer can take that water, and it's effectively a blank canvas, and they can create whatever they want, as opposed to other people starting out with a canvas that somebody else has used.
The water that comes from the snow melt is really great for making beer, which is one of the reasons that Fort Collins was such a perfect place for us as New Belgium to start a brewery, and also for a lot of other breweries in the Fort Collins area.
The high quality water that the Cache la Poudre River provides is the reason that we have a bustling brewing industry here in Fort Collins. And in turn, that makes CSU an ideal place to teach the science of brewing beer.
Unlike brewing schools around the world, all students get many opportunities to brew in this program. So we have 2 breweries on campus. The one that we're standing in is the New Belgium Fermentation Science and Technology Lab. But the other breweries in the Ramskeller in the Student Center, it's a student-run brewery, so we'll see what they come up with. New Belgium has been instrumentally involved since even before the program existed.
And so it was a natural for us when they were beginning to think about how they developed this program. We were talking with them about what kinds of curriculum they would want to be sure to include.
They would send brewers to classes to help make sure that the brew days made sense from a brewing perspective. Our head brewer here at CSU is partially funded by New Belgium.
Their commitment to training students to really understand that particular science, both in a theoretical way and in a hands-on way, was really impressive for us as a company. As an alum, that means something to me.
The idea is to really connect education with the fermentation industry. One of the beers that they brew here, they actually scale up and they get a brew at Odell and at New Belgium, and they get a brew at other breweries around town as well, and they get a brew over in the Ramskeller brewery. So they get hands-on experience at a variety of breweries.
Well, at the end of the day, this is where the water is coming from. So it's really important to understand what is happening in those landscapes. Are they healthy ecosystems? Are they not healthy ecosystems? And if they're in fact degraded, what can we do to improve those?
These rivers are really important to our nation, and they deserve to be protected and enjoyed by us, our children, and our children's children.
I think about my daughters. Their first hiking and camping experiences were on the river. Their future and quality of life depends on us protecting this watershed.
I can make the business case for why water and healthy watersheds and rivers are important, but I think there's an equally important humanist connection to natural resources, particularly water.
It's vitally important. If you don't have a clean water supply, I don't see how you can exist long-term as a society. It's critical to remember why those acts were passed in the first place, but also not to get complacent and say, oh, it's the 50th anniversary, we're done. You have to keep fighting for protection for natural systems. Desire on the parts of some people in our society to weaken that protection and to exploit these natural areas for short-term gain, regardless of the long-term consequences, never seems to go away. So it requires, to paraphrase, freedom requires eternal vigilance. So does environmental protection.
And I don't really know of any businesses or any farmer who would rather have polluted water than clean water to water their crops and to brew beer and all the other things that we'd like to do. I don't know of any citizens who would rather have polluted water. And if we can make that link between how we manage the watershed, the individual activities in every small rill and riffle here up in the forest, and our water quality downstream, then I think we'll be able to have clean water in Fort Collins. I'm certainly a beer drinker. As a fish biologist, it's a time-honored tradition, and I've enjoyed Fat Tire for a long time.
My favorite New Belgium beer is Fat Tire.
I really like Abbey.
Fat Tire is my favorite beer.
Whichever one is in my hand would be my favorite.
With the blue paddle.
My favorite New Belgium beers are any of their IPAs. I'm an IPA girl.
Fat Tire is a beer champion both in my heart and out in the world.
Probably the Hop Kitchen series, just because I like really hoppy beers.
My favorite New Belgium beer was Springboard. It had this interesting botanical flavor to it. That was a really nice beer.
And I'm also a huge fan of sour beers. Le Terroir would certainly be at the top of my list there.
Clutch, which was a special release brown sour. Came out about 7 or 8 years ago the first time, and then a year ago they brought another release out of it, and I was really, really pleased to see that come back.
Because I'm a fish biologist and because I like maltier beers like porters and stouts, the Cutthroat Porter is a favorite of mine and always has been.
That's a good one.
Sad Panda at Horse and Dragon Brewery.
Fat Tire is in Japan and Europe, and so it's really cool to be able to say, yeah, there's my local beer and it's brewed from my local rivers.
Another one that I think that I enjoy more because of the name is Runoff. How can you go wrong with a beer that comes from Runoff? You know, the brewers understand the nature of where that beer comes from.